that we get really good output, and that we have a really good reputation. And that we do it not only with the banks, but that we move beyond banking. People have moved from open banking. They're now starting to talk about open finance. Look at how RegTech, the use of RegTech, we can actually pull data from the open banking framework and be able to assess the financial state, the state of the economy in real time at the push of a button. When you've done a service for someone, do you want to ask them for payment and wait for them to send the payment? Or do you want to be able to pull the payment if possible with proper authorizations? This is the same thing. For a regulator, you can pull that data from the framework without having to wait. And for the banks, they can use that extra resources, staff that they have, they can retrain them, they can use them in different functions, different roles that will bring more value to the bank and bring more revenue. Ultimately, your shareholders will be happy as banks as well. And so will the central bank staff, being able to look at the data and be able to be more assured that what they're getting is credible. When you have rules and codified out, you know that the machine is going to run through that and it's going to give you a consistent output, and you can trust that. So this is where they're going with open source softwares, where you can actually look at the code and understand it. Just imagine what this can do from a regulatory and a supervisory perspective, and how much easier it can make the lives of the banks to start off with, but also the insurance companies. The FIU will benefit from that. Pension fund. This is a key thing. We have a national pension fund in Seychelles, so we could really benefit from that as well. And this is just starting to scratch the surface. There are amazing opportunities, and I think I will end up erring on the side of more, so I will try to stop now. I've already gone beyond less, so hopefully I'll be around afterwards. If there's any questions, more than happy to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. And you touched on an enormous number of highs already that I'm sure we're going to explore in more detail going on. I think there are also some challenges already inherent, or some areas of, data privacy in some of your some of the points you raised. Do you want everyone to have all the information at the click of a button at any time? There are issues there. So we'll explore that in the next round of questions. But I'd now like to move on to Ramizul Islam from the FIU in Bangladesh, which has been doing a lot on this topic as well. And Ramizul, I'd like to ask you to give a bit of the perspective of your FIU, how you are using fintech in the course of your daily operations as an FIU, and then maybe in the next round we can look more at the negatives. Okay, Ramizul, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Emily, to give me the opportunity to say something about our FIU. Before that, I am with our Bangladesh FIU since 2011, and I'm in charge of the analysis wing of the FIU. So, what is the motivation of using the RegTech or fintech in the FIU platform? First of all, the mutual evaluation. So, FATF recommendations are Bible for the FIUs. We have to comply with the recommendations for utmost positive impact for the economic prosperity. So, as per the recommendations that is stated in the FATF recommendation 29, that is related with the FIU. So there it is clearly mentioned that FIU should use IT-based platform.
Sorry, Ramizul, if I can just interrupt. For those of you, again, who don't speak AML CFD, the recommendations, the FATF recommendations, refers to the world standard on anti-money laundering and financing the financing terrorism, and also proliferation finance. They're recommendations to countries, and countries then implement them in their own systems. Sorry,
okay.
Ramizul.
Okay, thank you. Then I can give a short brief as Emily gives some introduction about the FATF. So if a financial institution to become an IT based, they have to consider some recommendations very positive way. Recommendation 1, that is assessing risk and applying risk-based approach, and it has a cascading effect of the all other recommendations also. And recommendation 10, there is customer due diligence, which is related with the KYC and other monitoring issues. Recommendation 11, that is record keeping. Recommendation 20, reporting of suspicious transactions. Recommendation 15, new technologies. And recommendation 16, wire transfers. These are very much related when a financial institution to be an IT based. So I'm coming to my point that FIU, as being an FIU, my main motive is that I have to get a very good result in my mutual evaluation. So I have to comply all the recommendations very prudent and active way. So and proactive
again,
way.
sorry if I can stop you, because I'm not sure that everyone is as versed in AML CFT as you are, Ramazul. So the mutual evaluation is the process by which countries are evaluated by their peers, and in the case of Bangladesh, that's the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering. And in the previous panel, there was a reference to, you know, the blacklisting of countries. That blacklisting of countries is when FATF says, you as a country have strategic AML CFT deficiencies, and for that reason, we're publicly calling you out. And being called out publicly can, in turn, affect the ease with which countries can receive and send payments. So it can have a knock-on effect on a lot of the things we're discussing here today. So that is the importance of this evaluation. Again, apologies for the interruption, but I think it's important.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm coming to the recommendation 29 that is related with the FIU. So it is clearly stated there that an FIU should use IT-based platform for reporting and analysis purposes. And in the same way, Egmont operational guidance that also permits that an effective FIU should use IT platform for communication and analysis purposes. So these two things is very much related with an effective FIU. So this is our main motivation. So we are using GoML software for reporting and analysis purposes. It is given by the UNODC, developed by the UNODC, and more than 50 countries using these softwares. So since 2013 we are using it, but operationally it is effective from the 2016. So from that part, reporting organizations, we have a wide range of reporting organizations like banks, non-bank financial institutions, NGO, NPOs, DNFBPs, insurance companies, money remitters, and money changers. So wide range of reporting organizations are there. So we actually first, we registered them within our system, that is GoML system, for the reporting purposes. Initially, when I joined in my FIO, all the reporting organizations actually report manually. And that time, we get STR, in the 2009, we get 38 STRs. And we, 2010, less than 100. But nowadays, we are getting more than 7,000 STRs per year. So this is a dramatic change because number of STRs doesn't mean that a country is a non-compliant or corrupted country. A lot of STRs is coming out. Rather, it's an indicator of a compliant country.
Ramazul, could I ask you to focus really on
yes.
how you use fintech?
Yeah.
In
so for the reporting purpose, actually, the bank use they have to allocate some IT-based system, and also within the FIU, we analyze by using the GoML software. So for reporting, we have two types of reporting: STR and CTRs. For the CTRs, actually, bank develop their own system, IT system, CTR, cash transaction reporting. So there is an intervention of the fintech. So according to our directives, they have to report CTRs if it is the transaction per day 1 million BDT, Bangladesh Taka. So to comply with this, a lot of huge transaction. Because our economy is cash-based economy, so a lot of transaction, they cannot do it manually. So they have no other way. So they have to use IT-based system for identify the CTRs and report back to the FIU. So according to our banking system, I just take some statistics that we have 59 banks. So 45% banks, they develop their IT system for reporting purposes in-house, and local IT, that is 27%, and 28% foreign IT firm develop these softwares. So we actually, this reporting system actually give us the potential to make our AML system more effective.
Thank you very much, Ramazul. Can I now turn to you, Deborah Paul-Louis of the Seychelles FIU, the Assistant Director. You're new to this function, but you come from the FSA. If I understand correctly, Seychelles isn't at present using, or your FIU isn't at present using a lot of fintech in its operations. Maybe it's not quite necessary yet. Maybe you don't have the volumes to need it, but maybe you could give us a bit of an overview of where at present you see some deficiencies or things that could be done better, and where you think, going back to Nicholas's point of why fintech could assist in your operations. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Being relatively new to the FIU, I think I'm a bit at a disadvantage, but from my initial discussion, the first thing, the use of technology is something that we are essentially looking into right now. It is an area that we see that could assist us a lot in terms of the reportings that we are getting. We are more or less using manual systems, and there is a lot of deficiencies with this. Essentially, in the local context, Seychelles, from the mutual evaluation report, we found that when it came to effectiveness, this was something that we were quite poor on it. And thinking about the use of technology, I know it is something that if we harness it in the right way, it would assist us to become more effective. And like Nicholas was saying, he raised some good points in terms of validation of information, in terms of harnessing the mass amount of data that we have out there. There is a lot of data to be harnessed, and we are not really tapping into this. So I think this is an area that we would need to look into. And also, one of the points that I think Seychelles as a whole, which is an area of weakness, is when it comes for the whole platform for collection of statistics. And this is something that we're looking towards technology to help us. From our mutual evaluation, again, we found that not only FIU, but all the other institutions, we have an issue with being able to readily access statistics, timely statistics, and even in our internal operation, we found that we are looking at things in a backward sort of things. It's not real-time information, and I think our statistics is our reporting is quite low. And I think...
Sorry, when you say statistics, what particular areas do you have in
terms of reporting for suspicious transaction, it's quite low. I think there's two main reasons. There's one, essentially, which is awareness, that there's a program that we need to do to sensitize the industry in terms of how to do these reportings, what it is that they need to look for. But essentially, even ourselves, we're looking into open source gathering of data, which is something that we cannot do right now because our system does not permit. So these are some of the areas that I think, although being new, I see the opportunities. There are challenges, of course, but I do see the opportunities to be tapped, to be harnessed when it comes to this. And it's not only FIU. This platform, I am talking about the FIU, but essentially we're looking for a strategy for Seychelles. And one of the recommendation, I would say, would be that, I think Alan from the FSA echoed this morning, we need to come up with a strategy where everybody is involved in this process. It would not be sufficient for one area to be tapping into new technology where the platform itself is not ready. So this is something that we need to have as part of a strategy so that everybody is on par and we partner with each other so that we move at the same pace. And one of the, wait, I won't talk about challenges. I'll just wait for the next part. Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, heartfelt cri de cœur to be more involved in what is happening within the Seychelles community on fintech going forward, and making sure that the FIU is part of that discussion. Very clear. Audrey-Annette, we've known each other for a long time. When I came here in 2013 or something, you were already at the FIU and had been at the FIU for a very long time. You're now head of compliance at Barclays, so I'd be very interested to hear from an institutional perspective within Barclays how you use fintech or technologies to identify customers, detect suspicious transactions, but maybe also wider than that. So you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Before I start, I'd like to apologize for my voice because I have a cough, and it's not because I prayed yesterday very hard for Tottenham to win. I've had a cough for the last 2 days.
We'll take that offline.
So thank you very much, Emil. So from an institutional perspective, currently we are using a fintech, mostly in the transactions monitoring space for us to comply with our ongoing monitoring obligation. So in transactions monitoring, last year we deployed artificial intelligence and machine learning to provide more efficiency in terms of how we monitor transactions. When we did the analysis, the look back over, for example, the false positives that we were seeing on the alert side, we saw that at least 75% of all the alerts that were generated were false positive, which means then that in terms of the effort and the attention that our analyst was putting in inquiring and investigating these alerts, it could have been better used in actually really focusing on the real suspicious alerts that really needed our attention. So currently, in fact, in the bank, we are running both transaction monitoring capabilities in parallel, just for us to be able to do the comparative analysis in terms of how the different transaction monitoring system looks at the different rules that we have inputted into the system, and also looking at the end result and looking at whether we are really able to identify genuine suspicious transactions from both of the systems that we are running in parallel. In terms of the reporting itself, so we have plans for us to also move towards deploying fintech to look at, for example, the case preparation side and the case management side when we have identified genuine suspicious transactions, looking at already the historical data that we have in place, because currently if you look at the banking system in Seychelles, it's not as modern as we would like it to be. And we do not necessarily, and this is a challenge. I'm already speaking of the challenge, but I do feel that you can't speak of the opportunity or the solution if you don't look at the challenge itself. In most of the financial institutions, you have legacy databases that do not necessarily speak to each other. So there has to be a lot of manual intervention to pull out the different data and to be able to compile the information or the report that is necessary for you to submit the report to the regulator. Okay. In addition, I see great opportunities as well in looking at eKYC and digital ID for the onboarding process of the customer. So the KYC side, the risk assessment side, and also building the customer profile. And it's the customer profile really that enables to enables you to do the ongoing monitoring of the customer, and being able to look at the different patterns and doing the behavioral analysis then that would come out from the day-to-day customer interfaces, the day-to-day interfaces that the customer will have with the bank. So I agree with Nicholas that Seychelles is actually in a unique position for us to really look at eKYC and digital ID. Based on some of the statistics that were presented to us yesterday, you know, every Seychellois, on average, every Seychellois have at least 2 mobile phones, and in terms of the average, then if you look at the infrastructure that is there, the moment a Seychellois is born, within 30 days, the child needs to be registered. You're given a unique identification. You go into the national database. You know, so the infrastructure that we would need for us to look at applying financial, the fintech and bringing in more efficiency into the different processes that we have, you know, is present. So for me, eKYC and digital ID would allow us to actually really apply the risk-based approach in a more efficient and accurate manner. Because currently, even with the risk assessment itself, with most of the banks that you will go to, once a customer is being onboarded and you know you're trying to build a customer profile, there is still a lot of manual intervention and human intervention that happens in terms of then giving a risk rating to that particular customer. Even when it comes, for example, to PEP identification and really trying
PEP stands
to,
for
politically exposed person. So persons who have senior management, senior position in government or political parties, or who will have significant influence in terms of government or different parastatals in the country. So these are the persons that we would, by regulation, we call them politically exposed persons. And with politically exposed persons, we have an obligation for us to carry out enhanced due diligence. So, you know, we really have to gather more information of these customers, because looking at the type of risk that they may pose to the financial services industry, they are seen to be inherently high risk. So automatically you put them in a separate risk category, and you have to obtain additional information on these customers. So the manner by which such information is obtained, again, it's very manual. And because, for example, in Seychelles, you don't necessarily have publicly, there is maybe information that is available that you can potentially use to verify the information that the customer would have provided you. That information is not available digitally, and it's certainly not available to financial institutions. So if such information, for example, was available, for example, if you're the president and I'm opening an account for you, I have to get you to do an attestation in terms of the assets that you have for me to determine your source of wealth and your net worth. And if the information that you hold is not necessarily available to me, there is a challenge then in actually verifying that information to ensure that the profile that I'm building for you as the president is actually accurate, because that would determine how well I'm able to carry out my ongoing monitoring activities as and when, you know, our relationship develops further. So for me, these are some of the opportunities that I see in Seychelles. And I am of the view that coming from Barclays, we are very fortunate because we can leverage off our group capabilities, which is not necessarily an advantage that the local institutions have. Hence why I would say that if you look at the AML compliance landscape in Seychelles, say over the last 15 years, in terms of the implementation of the different regulation, not much has moved. So for me, fintech presents a unique opportunity for us to really transform the compliance landscape, bringing ease of service to the business, because you have to think that as a customer, the first point of contact that you have with the financial institution is actually 20 forms that I ask you to complete, because even before you tell me what you require from me, I need to collect all this information from you. So the idea then is that, you know, compliance shouldn't be, AML compliance shouldn't be about making the life of the customer difficult. Or, you know, with the financial institutions, we do have to comply with all of these regulations. And as I've said earlier, the legal framework currently allows us to adopt a risk-based approach to the different customers, to the different segment, to the different product, hence where the opportunity for fintech comes in. Because with fintech, we have the opportunity then for us to really drill down on our risk-based approach, taking into consideration, for example, the national risk assessment, the results of the national risk assessment that the country would have done, because this is part now of FATF, FATF recommendation, taking into consideration the knowledge that I, as a financial institution, have on the different segments and on the different products that I have, taking into consideration the guidelines that the central bank and the FIU has provided it to me, the typologies that are out there, and really in a very limited time being able to ascertain your risk rating, but also the level of effort that I need to apply to you as a customer. Maybe on a last point, I would talk about the regulatory environment. And I think that as, you know, Vimal yesterday in one of the sessions spoke about having a symbiotic ecosystem, he calls it, and ensuring that, you know, there's that drive in each part of the ecosystem to make it work. So I think for Seychelles, we cannot afford, because of the cost of investment of fintech to us, we need to have the drive and the will and the commitment there from all stakeholders. And this will not only benefit the financial institutions, but it will also benefit to the other entities that also have very similar obligations that banks have, that my colleague from Bangladesh has averted to earlier, what he called the DNFBP, but they are the real estate agents, the lawyers, the attorneys, the
Casinos.
Well,
Casinos.
yes, the corporate service providers. So all of these smaller entities who, notwithstanding how big they are, notwithstanding the number of customers they have, they still have to apply the same standard that I have to apply as a bank.
Thank you very much. And I think I saw a lot of happy faces when you said that it could make the filling out of 20 forms whenever you open a bank account easier, because it's the first thing when I say that I'm AML CFT at a party or something, people say, oh, is it because of you that I have to do all this bloody work when I ever, you know, I just go into a bank? And as you say, before you've even asked a question, you already get all this information and fill out this and fill out that and tell us where you came from and what your mother's called and things like that. And does it really matter? And I think it's a good example of, if we could make that process a bit easier, I think everyone would be very happy. You touched on the you started discussing the challenges, and I'm very happy you did. Nicholas, when we discussed this panel a couple of days ago, you said, yeah, no, there's lots of good things, but instinctively I have some reservations. And so I was wondering whether you could elaborate a bit on where your concerns are, whether it's in the over-availability and the over-accessibility of personal data, whether there are other things that we're not seeing anymore. Maybe you could elaborate a bit on what your concerns are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. We tried to exercise great restraint in not talking about the challenges in the first place. As you can see, it was very difficult. But in terms of privacy, Audrey started to highlight some of the issues. If you look at globally, the issue of privacy is becoming more important. We've all heard about the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica leaks, right? The influence that Facebook advertising, for example, has had. Now, Facebook owns so much of your data. Google owns so much of your data that Google is actually now a word in the dictionary, right? So there are alternatives, like you could use DuckDuckGo that tries not to do that, and then they say that Apple does not sell your data. But also one key issue that my colleagues will talk about shortly is cybersecurity. Now, having all this information in a digital form, which is readily accessible, is absolutely amazing. But we need safeguards, we need proper safeguards around this. Just a quick question to the audience. How many of you have connected to the free Wi-Fi network in this room? Okay, so could see some of you perhaps, I'm assuming very few of you didn't know it existed. I'm assuming the rest are sort of cybersecurity conscious and perhaps you're not using a VPN, so you didn't want to chance it out. But getting people to think about the amount of information on their mobile devices and how this flows across the network and how this can be easily captured. Thinking about that, how often do you travel? You end up in a hotel, there's free Wi-Fi, you connect to it. You connect to your online banking, and you would have to assume that your bank is using a secure means of transmitting this information, but sometimes on the apps, there's no real indication that they are. So how do you really know that? Do you just trust blindly? So we need to make sure that when you're transmitting your data, that data from endpoint to endpoint is actually very secure. We need to make sure where it is stored as well. There are issues, one of the issues we spoke about was localization of data as well. Where is the data stored? Are there legal restrictions as to should the data be in Seychelles or should it be overseas? And the whole issue of cloud computing goes into that. But safeguarding that data. For example, you've heard about passwords leaked. eBay has been hacked before and their passwords have been leaked. There's a lot of other prominent services. Can that happen to that database where your data is stored? I know a lot of companies now are moving, they no longer just store the passwords alongside your data on their database, but they store what they call a hash of your password, so that even if a hacker gets this file, it's virtually meaningless to them. Unless you as a user use the same password 123 for every single online account you create. Then they can more or less figure out depending on some other issues. So they start adding what they call a salt. Just like in Seychelles we say, so they add a salt to your password and then they hash that and they store this so that what the hacker gets is meaningless to them. Just imagine how much information you transmit and how much of it you actually want the world to know. There are some people that share more freely on Facebook, some people less so. So we really have to have the proper legal structure around privacy. And in Europe, they've started developing GDPR that's been issued. So in Seychelles, we need a proper legal framework for that. We need a proper cybersecurity framework. So, and there's a lot of work going in the background in this. So we are on the right direction. So having those safeguards in place would definitely be a key issue. And also, some of my colleagues have already alluded to the fact that there's multiple stakeholders required to really get fintech to become a beautiful thing for Seychelles. We all hear about the beaches, the greenery, the blue seas. These are amazing. But then when we start thinking about what the financial sector itself could actually flourish out to be, this is where we really put everything together and we end up with something which is truly unique by the 1,000 miles. So if we need to move forward, we need to develop a strategy whereby we all work together collaboratively. And we need to be humble. When we don't know something, we need to say, okay, I don't know this something, but we also need to be curious, to actually dig deeper. And I think what we will find is that when we look at the opportunities and the challenges, and we look at the balance behind it, and we assess that in relation to the whys behind it, I think we will find that the opportunities far outweigh the challenges. And in fact, the challenges should excite us, should make us want to overcome them and move on and move beyond these challenges and become way better than we are today. That is the basis of human evolution.
Thank you, Nicholas. I was wondering whether I could switch back to you, Ramazul, because I mentioned in my introduction that one of the concerns that at least FATF has and that the discussions are ongoing about today is about virtual assets. And I understand that in Bangladesh you have prohibited virtual assets, right? Maybe you could tell us a few words about why, on what basis you've done that, and whether there is, as Audrey was referring to, whether there is a risk assessment behind that, and also how you would enforce that would be interesting to know.
Okay, so everybody here know about Bangladesh, right? Why? Because of cyber haste, I think. Because worldwide, Bangladesh is known about the cyber haste. Central Bank Reserve is haste in 2016. Criminals, they targeted for $1 billion, but they success for $101 million. So this is the main motivation why we are not introducing the virtual currency in my country. So in the year 2014 and later on in 2017, Bangladesh Bank actually gave the warning that Bitcoin or any cryptocurrencies that will be residents of Bangladesh cannot conduct this type of transactions. So this is the motivation that we actually follow the wait and see policy, because we have a very bad experience about the cyber haste. So we are taking time to take further decisions for whether the virtual currency will be introduced in our systems or not. But meantime, actually, we have the political commitment about the digital Bangladesh. Our present government is very much active to digitize each and every corner or activity of Bangladesh economy. So it is a little bit conflicting. So we have a committee, they are working on it, and maybe for the meantime we actually suspend the transaction of the virtual currency, but maybe in the future we will introduce our own crypto digital currency within our system. That is our that we believe. And another thing is that why we actually not introducing the virtual currency or Bitcoin. One basic thing is that it is not the fiat currency. And another thing is that Bangladesh government has planned to implement its own virtual currency. So we are waiting for this.
Thank you, Ramazul. And just to explain the heist that Ramazul mentioned in 2016, you might not all be aware of that, but in 2016, hackers, possibly from North Korea, managed to hack into the central database of the central bank in Bangladesh and transfer 80 million away through the correspondent bank, actually $80 million through the correspondent banks in the US, which eventually filtered out through the Philippines and then on to, I think, Hong Kong and some other places, and sort of the money trail went dead. But that was a big, at least in the AML community, that was a big, big event. And I think it illustrates how a lot of what is being discussed in the AML community is driven by these sort of large events. So if you look at the discussion around virtual currencies in FATF, you will see reference to Silk Road, Liberty Reserve, big scandals where bad people were using bitcoins to buy drugs and weapons and child pornography and lots of bad things, and of course those bad things happen. The question is to know whether the response then to say, okay, we're not doing any of this is the right one and is, as Audrey was saying, is risk-based, or whether that is one big thing. One terrorist event in 9/11 changed so much in regulation and in terms of what banks need to do and what others need to do. Is that always the right response? One understands it. It generates fear. Government wants to be seen to act, but is it always the best approach to say wholesale wholesale prohibition of virtual currencies, virtual assets? Deborah, I'd like to turn to you to ask about the challenges that you see for the FIU here in the Seychelles. Other parts of the economy are rapidly digitizing. Is the FIU sufficiently part of that? Do you see, do you have some concerns there?
Yes, like I said earlier, one thing that we cannot do, we cannot put our head in the sand and say it's not happening. It is happening, and we are aware of it. And according to World Bank Fintech, we found that between 2011 and 2017, more than 1 billion users entered the financial system. And this is something that's alarming for us. And one of the main challenge, the main fear that we need to be mindful as an FIU is that if we are the regulator, we cannot have a system where the supervisory supervisory entities, they are moving at a pace that's much faster than we are. Just from Audrey's intervention, you could see that Barclays, they are moving, and there is a vast amount of data that we need to capture. And for us, it's a challenge, and in our strategy, this is something that we would need to discuss. Before we talk about fintech, we need to, as a country, we would need to develop systems for us for both the entities and the regulators to be on par with what's happening. A couple of weeks, we had a meeting with the DNFBP sector. We had a meeting with the real estate, and we wanted to talk to them about AML, CFT, and awareness. And what we found out was that the regulatory platform of these entities was an issue. So it's the same thing here. We're talking about fintech, yes, but at the baseline, there's things that we need to talk about, that we need to sort out first before even going into all these difficult and jargons of fintech and technology, but realize what's our weaknesses, and now the strategy is to find ways for us to catch up.
Understood. Audrey, is your voice okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fintech facilitates more expansion of financial services, but also a wider group of people who can use it, possibly anonymously, non-face-to-face transactions. That's a good thing from the perspective of efficiency and timeliness. A traditional AML perspective would be anything that's sort of face-to-face, anything that reeks of anonymity, we have to be concerned. Should we be concerned? Is Barclays doing something to mitigate that? Is it something that has your attention?
Certainly, we should be concerned. From our point of view, based on the guidelines that have been issued by the regulator, there are certain things that we have to strictly abide to. And there are certain guidance that they give, for example, with regards to non-face-to-face transaction. And at the bank, apologies, at the bank, whilst we do put mitigants in place to ensure that even if that there are, in terms of the control environment, different things that we've put around that type of around that type of service that we would be able to offer to the customer. In terms of the inherent risk itself, we do see it as, for AML purposes, inherently high risk. But for me, looking at maybe other challenges that I see or the risks that I see, for example, from non-face-to-face transactions or non-face-to-face account opening, there's always the risk of fraud. In addition, from our experience, when we look at the availability of data, the accessibility of data, but also the accuracy of data, we might have the best fintech platform and the best fintech solution, but if the data that we're inputting into the solution is not accurate and it's not updated, essentially it's not going to provide that effectiveness and that efficiency in terms of the results that we expected it to have. From our experience, what we see is that, in Seychelles, people are very reticent to provide their information. I don't know if it's something with the bank or if they're like that with other institutions as well. Customers are very willing for them to come forward and to give you their KYC information because they want that product from you. They want to open that account. They want that credit facility. However, when it comes to updating their information or even, simple things like their mobile phone, you're trying to reach them because you think there's a fraudulent attempt on their account and they've changed their mobile phone and they didn't bother to come to the bank to tell you that, by the way, we've changed our telephone or we've changed our employment. Or so for me, that's the challenge. So the challenge really is, how do we ensure that what we're fitting into the different solutions that we would have is actually updated and accurate? Because if you have to think about our AML obligation with the banks, you either compliant or you're non-compliant. There is no room for experimentation. So if we think that we've adopted a certain solution that we think is going to move us towards compliance, but when the regulator comes, they're of the view that they cannot accept the KYC that we obtain through the fintech solution because, in terms of the verification, they can't understand the algorithm, then we're still, from their perspective, non-compliant. Hence why I said earlier, we need to sit down and do a holistic review of the current infrastructure, AML infrastructure that we have in Seychelles. Look at the opportunities, look at where we need to put in place additional resources for us to strengthen or enhance those capabilities. But as a country, then decide that this is the way forward. And with the way forward, because of the cost of the investment of these solutions, maybe not practically for the bigger banks, but for the smaller local banks or for the non-bank entities that we really want to bring them into the picture as well, because at the end of the day, they might have certain, if we're looking at putting together a national database where we can access information in a restrictive way, for example, for us to better inform our customer profile or our risk assessment process, we also need these players to be on board and these players to also input, to have an input as well into the system that we want to develop. So for me, engagement, having a plan that works for everybody. Was that me? Having a plan that works for everybody, and that would bring in a lot of the cost efficiencies, because being 95,000 people, 8 banks, Governor, you can correct me, 8 banks, too many bureaux d'échange. We can't achieve, in terms of the level of transaction, the volumes of transactions, the numbers of customers that we have, we cannot achieve economies of scale that other bigger countries can achieve. So hence why we all need to come together, decide on a way forward and say, by this time next year, we will have more than plan in place. We would have at least have a meeting between all stakeholders to really look at turning Seychelles into the next Estonia, because at the next FinTech meeting, I would like to be sitting there and seeing the names of Seychelles on there, and you know, us being able then, governor, to be able to talk of Seychelles as a successful case study.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And on that note, as a successful case study, I do note from my discussions yesterday with the governor that Seychelles is actually one of the few countries that has succeeded in re-establishing relationship with correspondent banks. So where I was earlier talking about the de-risking problem, the fact that banks are coming back is a really good sign, and is not universal, I can tell you. There are a lot of countries where it's still getting worse. So the fact that you're turning it around is testimony to what you're doing on this front. We're sort of at the end of this panel. I would still like to open the floor for some questions to the panelists, and if, when asking the question, you could introduce yourself and tell us who the question is directed to. Any questions? Gentleman there on the fourth row. Can somebody get him a microphone, please? Here.
Thank you very much. My name is Ivan Setimba from Alliance for Financial Inclusion. I just wanted to get a clarification on the issue of a unique ID and the existence of a database for all people or citizens of Seychelles. My understanding is that everyone has a unique ID. And to me, I think that's a very powerful tool. If you can uniquely identify all the individuals and be able to get all the information you need. Now, my question is, what is the issue? Is it that there's no link between, say, the financial institutions and the responsible authority that has this information? Is it that you know, there's no technology to be able to verify records by the financial institution to do you know, the due diligence? So I just need to understand, because many countries actually don't have that kind of system in place, and that's a big disadvantage. So Seychelles already has this, and I think that would be a great opportunity. Thank you.
Do you want to add to this question, sir? Yes. Sorry, could we have it here?
Thank you, moderator, for this very interesting discussion. In fact, my colleague has just touched on one of the questions, because it's really true that the when you're onboarding and you've got challenges of identity, and if you have a unique identity, of basically like almost 100% solved your problem in terms of actually identifying the problem. And then the next question is, what is really, as he put it, the question. But my additional question would be, what is the reporting regime within the Seychelles? Are you, first and foremost, what is the structure of the FIU? Is this like Edmond Group compliant to start with? And then also, when it comes to the suspicious transactions reporting, what again is the regime? Are these threshold based, or are they, you know, there's no limit, everything is suspicious? Because even when you talk of the fintech interventions, it will also depend on the regime. If it's threshold reporting, it's straightforward. $500, you'll go into the FIU and it starts to do its work. But if it is open, where anything could be suspicious, which is usually the case in the world anyway, even if you have a 500 threshold, there's still a possibility that the $400 transaction is suspicious. So what is the current regime in the Seychelles? Maybe if we started off from the architecture and build on to the fintech interventions after that, it will be much clearer.
Thank you. I'll take one more question at the back and then I'll have the panelists respond. The lady there, yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Maybe we are not all talking the AML safety language, but I have just to respond to the lady about modifying or the personal information. So I think that the customer is not, they don't want to have to communicate to the bank their phone number, their new phone number or new address. The problem is that they are asking them to go to the bank, to do the queue and to give you all the information about these changements. So maybe if you have all the banking account linked to mobile banking application, it will be more easier and everybody will be glad to modify his employment or his address. Also, if you have 3D secure for all transaction online, so they are obliged to keep you informed about their phone number, for example, or if they have some paper to receive, they have to change their address. So that was just an idea. But my question, and I think you are the right person to ask, is that one of the pillars that was presented by the AFI yesterday is to have digital identification to enhance financial inclusion. So when we say this from the side of financial inclusion and enhancing fintechs and development of payments, it's pretty clear that we have to set an EQIC regulation. So, but the problem is about the supervision department. So when you go to see them and say we have to make a specific regulation for this EQIC, they start talking about recommendation 10, recommendation 15, and they said that, okay, you can go for a risk-based approach for having a QIC based on the threshold of transactions, but how can we have a full EQIC without having security issues or AML issues? And what I want to say is that we have done a lot of research, and going to biometric identification has data protection issues, or having a full EQIC can be a source of frauds. So what do you think about this?
Sorry, was your question to the regulator or to the bank?
Anyone can answer.
Okay.
Who
fine.
can answer?
Okay, well, I'll yeah, exactly. Maybe we can first, Nicholas, you can first address the gentleman's and then you can discuss. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ivan, for your question. I think it's a great thing having a national database with unique identifiers. This is definitely a plus point. My only concern was how much information is linked to that unique identifier and which entities have access to which bits of this information. Because a unique ID on its own, with no other information, as an island, serves no other purpose. You need that unique ID to tie it to a name, okay? Maybe tie it to an address, tie it to a phone number. When all these are combined together, you get a more holistic picture, right? You start getting it. A person wanting to update their address doesn't have to go to 3 banks, which they call 3 accounts, to be able to update that address. They update it in one location, and that is transmitted across the whole network. So this would be like an important thing. We just need to ensure that there's proper safeguards in place and that this network is very secure, that access is only gained when proper authorization is available. Like we have with the credit information system now. The idea is that when you query about somebody, they have to give you the proper authorization to be able to query about their credit status. But also, the person needs to know who's queried about their status as well. So this is an important point. So this is where I was coming from, saying this could be a bit of a challenge, but just to make sure that you have the safeguards in place.
Okay, on this one, Audrey, you want to say a few words as well?
Yes, if you look at the Seychelles ID, it's actually very well structured, because from my ID you can tell if I'm male or female, my date of birth. You can tell if I was born in Seychelles, or I'm naturalized Seychellois, or I obtained Seychellois by naturalization, or if if you're a resident on a working permit. So it's actually very interesting the way they've set up the unique identity number. However, from a bank perspective, like Nicholas have said, there's a lot linked to that information, but it's piecemeal. So if I want, for example, to access the credit, there is no point of entry into the government system where I can log in, look at your ID, and see how many parcels of land you own, see if you've obtained maybe social security assistance in the past, see maybe if there are any other things linked to your ID. And I find that the government entities in Seychelles tend to be still very protective of that information. So there isn't a lot of scope then for the independent verification, of the information that you bring to the bank.
Okay. Can you address the...
Essentially, just to clarify, in terms of the reporting, the point I was trying to make is we have all the threshold, it's there. The point we're trying to make was in terms of opportunity, if like Bangladesh, we would want to have something that's more digital in terms of the transaction, using systems for entities to send this transaction, because what we have right now is essentially using a bit manual in emails, courier. So we would want to venture into this. So we do have systems, we do have threshold, but we would want to have technology assist with this. Yeah.
Thank you. If you could address the last question, and I know I saw other hands. I'm sorry for that, but we're going to have to cut it off after that, and I'm sure further discussions can be ongoing in the break. I apologize, sir. But, yeah, last question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Fadwa, for that question. From what we're trying to do in Seychelles, we are developing the risk-based supervision framework for regulation of entities. So in that respect, ideally our aim is to work to some extent collaboratively with the banks to ensure that we understand what their concerns are. But we also need to understand the concerns from the perspective of our international stakeholders as well, and ensure that Seychelles is maintaining its reputation. I am more than happy to, after the talk, to have a quick chat about some more in relation to your question.
Thank you for that, and thank you all for your attention, and thank you panelists for your contributions. I will not attempt to summarize this whole discussion, but I'm sure there will be further opportunities to discuss this in the breaks, and I apologize also to the next panel and the moderator. We're 10 minutes over time, but let's please give a hand for the panelists. Thank you very much. Well done, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Emil, and the panelists for your deliberations. The next discussion will focus on cybersecurity and cloud computing so as to provide an insight of the technologies, processes, and practices designed to protect networks, devices, programs, and data from risks such as attacks, damages, or unauthorized access. Join me in welcoming to the stage our moderator for this session, Mr. Hervé, the Chief Digital Advisor from the IMF.
1, 2, can you hear me? Yes, all right. Okay, I realize we are sitting here between you and the lunch, so we'll try to make that as interesting as possible. So my name is Hervé Tourpe. I'm the Chief Digital Advisor for the IMF, which is a new thing that we're doing at the IMF, getting really deep understanding into those technologies that really matter for members. And in fact, a quick word about that we do believe that fintech is the elephant in the room. Let's not forget there are other tech that are relevant to governments and central banks. So we use the general terms of member tech in general, so we don't forget about GovTech, DevTech, RegTech, SudTech, and all of those tech. Because it is important to kind of realize to not put all your eggs in the same basket. And in fact, you'll see tomorrow at the panel where I will be discussing on blockchain and DLT, I will be presenting a framework of 14 technologies. So it's not only everything about fintech, it's also not everything about blockchain. And I'm glad that in the past day and a half, the word blockchain has not been thrown away at every single discussion. That's a very good sign. Anyway, this session is about one of the 14 technology domains I'll be discussing tomorrow, which is cyber security, cyber risks, and maybe a little bit about cloud adoption. It is one of the 12 elements of the Bali FinTech agenda that Sharmista presented this morning. I will not ask you which element number it is related to. I can tell you it's number 7, which is about safeguarding the integrity of financial systems. So with that being said, we've got an esteemed panel here from different backgrounds that I think can cover very well the concept, the question of cyber. So on my left here, Mr. Hendrik Andre, that you know in Seychelles for being the Director of Information Technology, Department of Information, Communication and Technology, ICT, in Seychelles. On his left, I guess, Mr. Kai Keller from the World Economic Forum. Kai is the project lead on financial stability, innovation, and economic growth, and he does a lot of work with fintech firms. On his left, we've got Mr. Vimal Kumar, has been in the panel already, CEO of the retail and business banking portfolio at APSA, the African Regional Operations. On his left, we've got Fadwa Jouali from the Central Banks of Morocco. Fadwa is the head of fintech and payment development at the Central Bank of Morocco. And at her left, we have Jude Woodcock, financial surveillance analyst at the Central Bank of Seychelles. So we heard a little bit of the previous sessions about some cyber risks as it relates to AML, CFT. Bangladesh is a good example of a concern that applies to AML, CFT, but it's actually a concern in general for central banks. So it's been 2 years since that hack has been done, and that was kind of a wake-up call for many banks. In fact, unless you were the federal bank, the Fed in the US, the European central banks, you were not necessarily sensitive to the concept of being hacked, really, of being a target of hacking. Now, since Bangladesh, we realized any single bank of any size, central bank of any size, was actually and is still to this day being the target of attacks. So that is your reality. Whether you realize it or not is the same. You are being hacked as we speak. What is also interesting, statistically speaking, is that 75% of those hacks have nothing to do with a brute force attack, some super smart hacker going through some holes in your security. No, mostly they pick up your phone, they send you an email, and they expect, your employees to click on an email. That's 75% of the hacks. In fact, Bangladesh is an example of that, which was simply, it is believed to be a word macro that had a virus. As simple as that. Now let me do a little show of hand here. Don't be shy. Nothing wrong with that. I want to have a sense of awareness of cyber implementation in your own organization. So as an employee, raise your hand very high if you are asked to have a complex password. Okay, so that's pretty much everybody. Raise your hand if your password is changed every, say, 90 days or a certain frequency. Fantastic. 1 month. Good. Complex password. Very good. Bangladesh, of course, Bangladesh. Should be every day. I am not surprised about that. Raise your hand if you are forbidden to install the non-standard software on your work computer. A bit less people, but still hand be raised. That's a very good sign. Raise your hand if you have a mandatory cyber awareness program once a year. Much less already. Raise your hand if you have a cyber security team in charge of doing some phishing exercise where they will send you fake emails without telling you and see what happens. Much less already, right? So this is not surprising. This is kind of what we see all around the world. But this is also a concern, right? Because what I described here is the strict minimum to really make the job a little bit harder for hackers. And there's much more that has to be done. That's just the 101. So I'd like to go through a panel now and have a discussion about cyber in general. But the point I was making here is that whether you work for a fintech company as an employee, as a user of a fintech product, whether you work for a financial institution or you use a service, a financial institution's service, it doesn't matter. You have a role to play into making the whole thing more secure. So I wanted you to keep that in mind as we're going through these discussions. Now, Hendrik, and I'll ask the same question to all of you. We'll go down the aisle on what is your view on the current cyber risk situation to your perspective? Oh, yeah, sure. Better.
Okay, I'm not sure if there has been any study on a national level regarding our cybersecurity readiness. But what I know in Seychelles, there might be places that might have cybersecurity set up, their own cyber team, but they are not coordinated for sure. They are not coordinated. We are not working as a team, so they might have a different implementation of security. In that respect, if I may go a little bit further, the department brought forward a cybersecurity policy and strategy to the cabinet 3 weeks ago to actually address this problem. Actually, the policy addressed...
So you're making an announcement here, something that just happened 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
That's very timely for this conference.
Exactly. So to more or less address this issue of cybersecurity, the main aim is to bring everything under a national umbrella, other than having silos, so to speak. So the policy in itself addresses this issue in 5 objectives. The first one is ICT infrastructure, meaning we want to ensure that we identify all critical information infrastructure, for example, telecom, healthcare. We ensure that we identify them, and we have to ensure that they are resilient against attacks. So this is a thing we make sure that the policy that all ICT, all critical infrastructure is well protected and can be resilient, have BCM in place. Second objective is education as well. I mean, the public, like you said, 75% attack is through normal people, so education probably needs to be put in place nationally, okay? As well as upgrading our professional in terms of security, because we need to have qualified personnel.
Skills, yep.
Yep. And the third one, objective is to have legal instrument. For example, cybercrime to tackle any crime that in the cyberspace, and as well as any other policy that will handle cybersecurity matters. Okay. The fourth one is to actually we need to have a governance body, because instead of having silos of bodies operated, we will have one coordinated bodies that informs on security matters and as well handle cyber threats. And for that, I'm talking about having even a setup of CERT, computer emergency response teams as well, to ensure that any cyber threat issue that occurs is well coordinated amongst every key stakeholders.
Within Seychelles.
Within Seychelles. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, we will definitely need other international CERT, because we are a bit new in this field. So definitely as much cooperation as we can get in that field, we'll be looking for that.
And we hear that a lot. The international coordination is becoming
Correct.
Essential.
Yeah, and we've already have a bilateral agreement with a couple of countries, but we'll be looking for more. Yeah, definitely.
Very good.
All right.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you very much, Hendrik. Kai, to your perspective, you work a lot with fintech firms. So what's your perspective on the cybersecurity?
Yeah, thanks. And first of all, thanks to the central bank and to the bank for inviting us to be part of this. We've done a lot of work with fintechs, as you said, and with traditional banks, trying to understand the changes in the financial ecosystem as a result of technology, and cyber, together with the use of customer data, for us are the two most pressing risks that the system is facing. Now, when I put myself into the shoes of a fintech and I think about cybersecurity, I think one of the first challenges is to really understand of the expectations. What sort of framework should I be aiming for as I develop my cybersecurity architecture? Right? When we reflect on what we heard so far at the conference, if I'm a local entrepreneur here, I'm probably going to develop some sort of application that I want to take to other markets, right? And it's nice to understand what the local requirements are, but how do I get my head around what requirements are elsewhere? We also see that challenge playing out for the big banks, right? If you're big global banks, it's very, very difficult to comply with the various regulations globally, because the language differs quite significantly between jurisdictions. Probably the core of it is the same in terms of requirements, but the language around it differs quite significantly, and they spend enormous resources trying to understand it and map it. So imagine a small fintech, few people team to be able to do that. And then the third challenge I see is this idea, well, how do we get away from just box ticking compliance to actually embracing the spirit of what certain controls really mean? The challenge I see often in the fintechs that we work with, if you have a small team of 1 or 2 people, you probably have one person who's really good at the technical, and you have one person who's really good at the business. Nobody in a founding team usually has a policy background, right? So as you face various demands as a fintech starting out, and you're tackling a lot of different risks, and every single risk can potentially put you out of business tomorrow, well, cybersecurity is probably not the first thing you think about, right? But it's enormously important down the road as you then partner with bigger institutions, and all of a sudden you come into a situation where you might have to redo your entire architecture because now you're looking to partner with a big bank and they have certain requirements that you need to meet, and doing that 2-3 years into your product development is extremely expensive and extremely complicated, and it can potentially put you out of business. So all of a sudden your great idea falls flat because you're not able to partner. So these are some of the challenges that I see in the work that we do. We try to tackle this, trying to develop a global framework for what cybersecurity for fintechs can look like. I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or later, but I'm happy to speak to that.
Yeah, did you have some slide? I can't remember if you had some slide.
I do.
Did you want them or?
Sure, I can walk them really quickly because I want to make
sure.
sure we have time for discussion. Do you mind passing me the clicker? So building upon what I just laid out, what we did is we worked with a number of global institutions and with about 25 global fintechs, trying to develop a fintech cybersecurity framework that really meets the challenges that I just laid out. So you see some of the private and public sector stakeholders that have been working with us on this. And the challenges we saw, well, on the incumbent side, you have a situation where fintechs come to you and say, I want to partner with you. The reality is that the fintechs looking to do that are at various stages of readiness, right? And then if you're a Citibank or Bank of America, JP Morgan, engaging with every single one of those fintechs is extremely time-consuming and probably expensive. So there's a real, not frustration, but challenge on the incumbent side to undergo that process with every fintech that is coming to them, right? The reality is also you might have someone in your business who says, I want to partner with this fintech who could really benefit from that solution, and then legal and compliance comes in, and the whole process becomes very, very complex.
Is that why Nick was saying yesterday, we don't have a lot of babies? That's what on the way, I guess, preventing from having babies, the difficulties of understanding each other's and the cost.
Yeah, I mean, you got to realize, I mean, dealing with a big institution is extremely complex, right? And they're oftentimes limited by the various, the lack of coordination internally, and plus the regulatory pressure that they're under to comply. Now, if you're a fintech, that process on the flip side is very, very expensive and frustrating as well. Now, I want to partner with 5 different banks, and every bank is sending me a questionnaire with 300 questions, and the questions are all slightly worded differently. It's an extremely painful process to go through, so we could probably benefit from some streamlining. So that's what we tried to get to. And what we learned in that process is, before we do that, I thought it would be a fairly straightforward exercise, because everybody has an interest in cybersecurity. Every stakeholder benefits from it. The fintech, the incumbent, the regulator, the consumer. However, what we learned in the process, just finding common language and what we're actually talking about is extremely challenging. And we saw that in the United States, the industry, the big incumbents, developed what's called a cybersecurity profile, right? FS profile. And what they did is they took all the global regulation and they tried to map it against NIST. And when you see the visuals of it, it's online. It's extremely interesting.
NIST is the International National Security Standard body.
Exactly. And as part of that, they developed a sort of lexicon in the appendix to it. Now, the FSB published its own lexicon quite recently, and what you saw is, well, the language differs. So even the big incumbents in the FSB couldn't agree on common terminology. So language is a huge issue in this field, and I think we need to find a common glossary to get on the same page of what we're actually talking about. The other issue is that approaches to risk differ quite significantly between a fintech and an incumbent. The way incumbents look at risk is extremely different than a fintech looks at the risk. And just having a dialogue around that and get a mutual understanding of where everybody is coming from helps in the process. And the fourth one is, and I know part of the discussion is going to be about cloud, is this issue of fourth party risk. And that's something we didn't really fully consider starting out, but that became increasingly important as we move forward. Most fintechs rely on the cloud, which is actually a good thing in terms of cybersecurity, I believe. But it just introduces another stakeholder group that we need to consider increasingly going forward and getting ahead. What does it mean operating on the cloud? And what does it mean for my cybersecurity exposure?
Just know that for the crowd here, Kai just said something quite interesting that I'm not sure is shared by everybody. He just said it's a good thing that they're using cloud for cybersecurity perspective. If we have some time, we'll like to check on that with you, if you agree with that.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up here because I know I'm probably way over time already. So what we're currently doing is we're working with this group of incumbents and fintechs to develop basically a framework for what good cybersecurity for fintechs globally could look like. And then the second stage, try to get to a cookbook version of that. Because what we realize is it's nice to have the technical language, but for the fintech, it's actually really important to get some very concrete translation of that, of actual steps they need to take in order to get to the hurdle that framework lays out. And what we realize is, instead of drafting a new framework, there's a lot of stuff out there that we can leverage. So the most basic layer is probably the CIS-CSC 20, so the Center for Internet Security developed some basic 20 controls, industry agnostic, that could form the basic layer of what we call a Toblerone. The World Economic Forum is a Swiss-based organization, so we like that Toblerone idea.
And realize that you're putting that in front of a crowd that he's about to have lunch.
Exactly.
That's terrible what you're doing here.
So that's a base layer, and then you can overlay it with something that's more industry-specific, which is its FS sector profile that was developed by a lot of the US institutions, but is really aiming to be global. And from there on, you have a general sort of base layer of what cybersecurity within the financial services context could mean, and you can introduce different hurdles for the size of the institution or the sort of data that they're handling. And then from there on, you have these little peaks that you have in the Toblerone. And those can be business case specific, and there's a lot of guidance out there already for the specific business cases, for example, payments. So we didn't need to really get into that. But that's the work we're currently doing. It's an ongoing process, and if anybody's interested, I'm happy to talk more over lunch or even get you involved in that process.
Good, that's very interesting tool or maybe framework that to consider. Vimal, to your perspective, what is the cyber risk situation you'd like to share with us?
Firstly, I'm not a technical expert, so a lot of the members in the panel are deep into the technical aspects. But what I want to share is really from a user, from an operating manager's perspective. Having seen banking through many geographies and many years now, till about a few years back, a SIM swap was considered a hack. And we had that issue, especially as internet channels became more popular and mobile banking and internet banking started. The first worry was that collusion led to SIM swap. and people started stealing your OTPs and they hacked your system. So it was as basic as that. Then the emergence of weaknesses in Windows' operating model was the second layer of worry that emerged. And these were simple problems, but smart people figured it out, that the older version of Windows was easy to hack. And criminals started focusing there. But I think as bank and as a bank that is heavily into emerging partnerships with fintechs, what really worries me is as technology is emerging, we do not fully understand everything. So, what we broadly describe as cybercrime, it is now taking different shapes and forms as technology is growing. So whether it's cloud that Kai is advocating and I'm somewhere in the middle on cloud, or all the new technologies around artificial intelligence, big data, and machine learning, it just seems like technology is introducing more risk into the system. Mm-hmm. And the organized group of hackers, now whether they are individuals or they are a crime syndicate or they are nation states, they're actually enjoying the fact that complicated technology is making their lives easy. I mean, imagine the US presidential elections getting hacked. You wouldn't imagine that. I mean, although the jury is out there, but there's a very clear feeling that the Russians interfered with the results of the presidential election, or they manipulated to some extent. And really, that's really the challenge. And as banks and fintechs start coming closer together, these weaknesses are going to get significantly exploited. And it brings us back to the fact that the technology that a financial institution like us would operate on, and the technology platforms that fintechs will choose, may not necessarily create a safer ecosystem. And that's something that we'll have to see how it pans out as deeper partnerships emerge. And that's one thing that bothers us. So in APSA, we've rewritten our enterprise risk management framework. And we've done that very consciously. And Governor, you would have probably had a chance to look at it in the last regulatory college where we made the fresh presentations around it. What we are trying to do really is understand the emergence of these new risks, which are completely different to how we have operated in the conventional environment. And for us, I think the way we've defined our participation in the cloud especially is that we're looking at three layers. We're looking at application as a service, we're looking at platform as a service, and then finally infrastructure as a service. Realizing that our jurisdictions are not yet ready. Yeah. They're not yet ready to fully imbibe the fact that customer data and transactional data can reside quite peacefully in the cloud, and that everybody is not nervous about it. Today, very few jurisdictions we actually have consent from the regulator to put everything on the cloud. Mm-hmm. So we're operating a hybrid model, and that's how we are operating even with our fintech partnerships, where the internet-facing environment, we are happy to put it on the cloud, but we're very careful about the customer data that sits behind 3-4 layers of firewall protection. So, but that's not ideal, because in this discussion, what we should be talking about is, how do you make banking fast, cheap, and hassle-free? Because today, these three words are not associated with financial services. It's the opposite. Everything is cumbersome, everything is expensive, and everything is late. It just frustrates the customer. But if you have to come to these three terms, then we have to figure out a way how are we going to adopt these emerging technologies in a manner where it is safe, protects everybody, and there is no weak link in the chain, because it's the weakest link that gets hacked. Mm-hmm. And as you bring MNOs and fintech partners and other stakeholders into building new marketplace-driven customer propositions, any one of them having a weakness means that you are at risk as a financial institution and as a financial system in the country. And I think that that is really where there's a lot more work required. And the emergence of more agile regulations will be important in that direction to protect everybody.
So what I understand you're saying is that the quantity, it's not only the technologies probably that has weaknesses and introduces new risks, it's the attractiveness of data, more data being digitized in a way and distributed through fintech and banks that becomes more attractive to hackers.
Yeah, it's very simply, if you look at machine learning and artificial intelligence, people, that technology was meant to make things better. Is automatically you start learning. So you could argue that cyber defense, for instance, will be better if you put in deep AI. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, the deep AI can be used to hack also. So it can be used to defend and it can be used to hack. So it depends, how we create a balance where things that are meant to protect us don't start hurting us. Mm-hmm. And it's the lack of understanding of how these technologies will really develop in the future. Because these are all nascent, interesting technologies. If you look at blockchain, there are still keys. It's not like blockchain is 100% safe and accurate. How do you protect those keys? So that's important, that who is protecting. Finally, the question comes, who guards the guardian? Mm-hmm. That's where it comes to. Is that the guys who are protecting the keys, if they let those keys out, blockchain can get hacked like anything else. And then the whole value of blockchain suddenly drops.
We had a hack yesterday at Binance,
yes,
where they stole 7,000
And Governor, I might say something controversial, but in my view, I think as this industry develops, I think ethical hacking should be encouraged. I think institutions need to build capability, in-house capability, where you are constantly trying to hack your own systems. Mm-hmm. I mean, ethical hacking, penetration testing is not enough. And I'm not a technical expert, but I know for a fact that some of the tools that we use today are inadequate. It's typically penetration testing. You get a third party, does the penetration testing, oh yeah, everything's fine, signed, go. But that's not good enough. I think we need to build capability within organizations, and not just banks, but across, where ethical hackers are encouraged, and they're constantly trying to poke holes and see what's going through and how strong are our defenses.
Precisely right. And I was alluding in my introduction to your cyber team trying to send you phishing emails to test your readiness. I think that's part of the same mindset. Yeah. Fadwa, would you like to share with us what's going on in Morocco?
Okay, but before, maybe I will give you my personal point of view. If you ask me about cybersecurity, maybe the only thing that I trust is the sheet of paper that I'm sticking on my computer camera. So when you saw all the data breaches and all the cyber attacks and all the cyber risks that you have, or data that you have on social networks, you are very afraid to use technology. But I think that being a regulator and an enhancer of fintech and technology, you have to well understand what is the risks, because they are new risks. And it's not the traditional way that we were supervising financial institutions. So,
did you want the slides? Maybe I think you had some slides too.
Yeah, maybe I can not use it and just keep the material. So what you have to keep in mind is that hackers are smart, and in their way of hacking, they are targeting the vulnerability of a system. So being a developing country, that is very good opportunity for this hacker, because they know that we are not enough trained or enough informed about all the risks that we are facing. Also, with the development of the information society and digital economy, we have as a nation, and it's only a central bank, to build a digital trust and information system security. So when it's come to talk about cybersecurity, I think it's not only an IT team business or a regulator or authorities. It's wider than that. It's a national and international cooperation that have to be set. And in Morocco, for example, what we did in the past 8 years is that the government set a national cybersecurity strategy, and we have all the stakeholders around the table. So you have governments, banks, regulators, etc. So what we did in the first time is that they create a specific department that is managed by the national defense administrations. And in this entity, we have what we call the CERT. Maybe Henry has talked about it. And they published a range of guidance and rules that have to be used in terms of cybersecurity and how to prevent from our system from cyber attacks. So if we can go to the...
So it seems like Seychelles is doing the right thing. They seem
Yeah.
to be investing in the same type of activities.
So this is just about what is the strategy axis. So we have to do a periodic risk assessment for our information system. And you have to identify the critical infrastructures. And by critical infrastructures is all the installation and all the systems that are very essential to give or to do the main function of a society, like safety, security, or other economic and social well-being. The second axis is how to mitigate these risks that was identified. So we have always to update our protection of the sensitive data and information systems. The third axis is setting a legal framework. So you have to have like a regulatory basis on what all the administrations and all the stakeholders had to work on it and raise awarenesses and do a lot of training. And number 4 is promoting national and international cooperation. So Morocco is joining the common criteria and is also using the NIST standard and ISO standard either. And this it's possible because we have an international cooperation and international relation with another authorities.
So maybe to Hendrik's point that he was calling for international collaboration, you guys are sharing with us that NIST standard, ISO standards are helpful to you.
It's very helpful because I think we don't have all an IT background. So the first time they told me that we have to did an oversight based on NIST standards, I didn't understand the word. So I was assisted by a 90 person, and now I can do these controls and on-site controls by myself because I understand the main or the key things that I have to see in an information system.
So that's interesting because what we're saying here is that cybersecurity is not an IT role anymore. It is, certainly, but not only that anymore. In fact, it wouldn't work if it was. And it goes all the way to the regulators' responsibilities.
Yeah, because before regulating something, you have to understand. And when we met fintechs, the first thing that we ask, okay, you have a new technology, and he starts talking about blockchain, DLT, and it's not ashamed to say, please, can you go slowly so I can understand what are you saying? And in my point of view, what is the risk in background of financial stability that I have to conserve? I may identify other risks that he is not saying. So with this new entity of information, we have a lot of flows. So I'm not going in details. You have electronic exchange, legal data, protection of personal data. But also we have, and I will focus on this national directive, it's a decree that define what is a critical infrastructure and what is a sensitive data. So we have a directive that is very detailed on what we have to do and what every information system that was identified like a critical or sensitive have to do. So the first one is to establish in this entity that is identified as a critical infrastructure, a dedicated structure to prevent and detect cyber attacks. So they have to be well-trained, and they have to be aware about all is becoming all over the world. So the second thing is to maintain and update the list of information systems of entities that are critical and sensible. Quantify and plan a well-balanced budget, because being compliant to cybersecurity regulation is costly. And control and track all operation done by the manager of these infrastructures. And you talk about training and education. It's a really important thing that everybody has known that there is a risk of using cyber services. So if I take an example, it was about the ransomware. We had say that it's it has an international impact, and they talked a lot about it. And maybe if you are not aware of that, you can pay the ransom that they are asking for. And the seventh one, and maybe it's the problem with the cloud, is to host all the sensitive data on national territory. So this, it's very difficult if you want to use the cloud, because we don't know if this cloud are respecting the national or the territoriality of this data. Even we have the data center that is based in Morocco, we cannot be sure that these data are not replicated or affect the confidentiality or integrity of availability of this data.
So that's an interesting point, right? That is a growing concern in many countries. We know that India has enacting a law that prevent any institution to host the data outside of India. We know that South Africa, I believe Ghana, the gentleman from Ghana is here. You see that in Africa a lot. Of course, the size of Seychelles, one would not imagine that a cloud such as Amazon or Azure would host their servers on Seychelles. So there's a different probably viewpoint to the perspective of the size of Seychelles, of course.
So when you see that we have this national dimension of cybersecurity, what they did, the National Defense Administration, they appoint some coordinator in each sector. So the central bank was appointed like a coordinator for all the banking sector. So we have a mini CERT in the bank, which is called the SOC, the Security Operation Center. So we have to always be in relation with this national CERT to report each incident and to report what is coming or the things that we are doing on regulation of cyber resilience. And maybe we can talk about the infrastructure later.
Okay, very good. Thank you for sharing your experience, which is very much advanced, as we can see. Jude, to the central bank financial, financial surveillance, that's the word I was looking for, perspective, what is your take on the cyber risk situation?
Wow, being the last person to speak, that's nice because you already covered everything.
So you agree with everybody, we can move on.
And, but we'll take it from, just a correction, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, and I oversee the Information Security Program at the Central Bank. Cybersecurity has been cited as the greatest threat in the financial evolution. Now, since yesterday we've been talking about security in all these presentations that we had. And it is considered as one of the top risks that keeps CEO awake at night. Now, let's take a step back. What is cybersecurity? It's another buzzword. Simply put, cybersecurity is a conversion of people, processes, and technology to protect your digital data, either in transit or at rest. So But there are other things that comes with it. Now, central bank, we do embrace processes, and we do embrace the risk or the challenges that comes with cybersecurity. And there are big opportunities in developing technologies to ensure that how can I say that? We developed, and FinTech will bring those kind of development towards central bank and other, I would say, companies or FinTech companies in Seychelles.
Can I try to summarize, make a point to go to what Vimal was saying, that Vimal's point was new technologies introduce new risk. And I think what you're saying is that is true, but at the end of the day, it's the data.
Yes.
So concentrating the people, the process, the technology on protecting the data, and you're more specific, at risk and on transit. Yes. At the end of the day, that's what we have to do, realize. Very interesting point.
Okay. That being said, we would like to see, for example, how Morocco has gone about the whole process of implementing the cybersecurity together with FinTech, so that we can learn from that and move forward.
Very good.
Thank you.
So I'd like to turn to the room for a few questions before getting back to the panel. So do we have any questions from the room? Raise your hand so we can give you a microphone. Got a question over here from the gentleman from Ghana, and Alain over there. Let's start, and the first question here. So we'll take the three questions. Maybe in the order that where the microphones is closer, so we'll get Alain here, Peter, and I forgot your name. From Ghana. So
hi,
we'll take the three questions together.
From the discussion so far, we've seen that having a national policy for cybersecurity is really important. And in the development of that policy, and also in the development of a national fintech policy, I'm guessing that the coordination between the two is very important. Maybe Morocco, I mean, I'm not sure if you have a national policy for fintech. What was the development process for both? I mean, was it done in parallel, or was it one done before the other? What was the process?
Okay, that's the first question. We'll take the three questions together. Peter, over there.
Thanks. So the question is, pre-technology, there was no risk of anyone stealing your digital identity or your digital money or your digital anything because it wasn't there. We've moved from an era in most of our lifetimes where we now have something stored somewhere digitally, data at rest, I like that, and data on the move. Now, there's a big drive in some parts of the digital world to say that we should be getting back, so we should deconcentrate. So currently, for example, banks carry concentration risk because all of the data at rest effectively sits within a bank around my personal finances as well as many millions of others. Do the banks see as part of their strategy the idea of distributing out the risk? So in other words, for example, you know, more and more having to have keys, for example, stored, you mentioned keys, on your own device as opposed to the bank holding them in custody for you. Is that part of the strategy around banks? And I suppose, Vimal, you would be a good person to answer that question.
Very good. And we'll take the third question over there.
Yeah, mine is not a question, it's a contribution. I think I heard my colleague from, one of them from Bank of Seychelles saying that they need support to come out with a framework for cybersecurity. I think I want to suggest that we should move away from this support. In the central bank, you should have a lot of expertise. What you need to do is to come together. You know your system better than whatever external support will come. Put a team together. Even under the Association of Africa Central Bank Framework, which we attended last year in Chad, there is a framework already in place put a team together at the central bank, I mean interdepartmental team, come out with a draft, and then you seek external people their opinion on your document. Then you explain to them how you want to do it. Because if you want to depend on external support to draft your own cybersecurity, I'm just using Ghana as an example. We came out with our own list, and what we did was to share with other parties, interested institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and the other institutions. They will express their opinion on that. Then you have a Seychelles document. But rather than saying that you need support to do cybersecurity document, I think we should be forward-looking as a central bank to come out with our own system. Because when they come out with it after this thing, you cannot implement it because your cybersecurity framework is different from whatever it is being done in the US or in whatever. Thank you.
Good, thank you. So we'll take the first question. Maybe Fadwa, did you want to address it?
Okay, so I will just add something about the national cybersecurity strategy that we are adopting. It have been like a national platform of exchange of information between all the administration, but also with banks or regulators in on national side. But what we are doing in the central bank is that we create a job that is digital chief officer. So we have one correspondent in each department, and he's a person that has direct contact to our SOC in the central bank, and that have a periodic meeting with the CERT, the national CERT. So they have to report all the information we have about new risks that we are identifying by the emergence of fintechs and new technologies. And the aim after all this process is to build working group to really have all the experts that we need to figure out these issues. So maybe as a regulator we have financial stability, we have resilience of infrastructures, but maybe in their side, the national defense is seeing other risks also. So we come up with a couple of rules that we have to respect, and we can also ask for an assistance in our mission of control that we have. So we can be assisted by someone from the CERT or someone from the national defense if his expertise is in blockchain or DLT or something like that.
Very good. So you have clarified also the accountability on that that relationship. Nima, do you want to take the second question we had on management keys?
It's a very interesting question. I mean, I'll try and respond to it in parts because there are many parts to what you said. Although it was a short question, I think I did say it in my opening. As far as the APSA group is concerned, we're right now at a stage where we're not jumping from one to the other. So we're somewhere saying that we're going to adopt a hybrid infrastructure. So we will adopt cloud, but we will also rely on a physical storage of that information because we believe we're not yet convinced that everything can be put on cloud and it can be safe and secure. And secondly, remember we are multi-jurisdictional, so we're also driven by the governing laws of the jurisdiction, and most of our jurisdiction in Africa, as you know, is not yet a few things on the cloud. We've put few things on the cloud, but then those are relatively not related to customer data and customer ID and information. So through our channels, we're relying a lot more on biometrics, so your IDs are really biometrics stored on the phone, but as it hits our internet-facing environment, it's behind a very secure, secure firewall. Now, what we are beginning to see is in a lot of our markets, regulators are insisting on us mirroring data in the country. So because we're regional, our initial architecture was to host everything out of South Africa. but we are now increasingly getting pressure from a few regulators that we need to bring that data center into those countries. And that kind of creates more complexity because you have to invest in a proper protected data environment in the geographies. So that makes our architecture even more complex. But responding to the emerging threats, one of the things that we've definitely put into place is, from a disaster recovery perspective, we are active with our main data center. So that's a massive investment that we've made. It is a data center that with DR, which is completely active to the main. And so in parts, like I said, we're looking at the benefits of cloud because it helps us also reduce our operational cost and move a lot of the OpEx cost into change, which is required given the the change in technology, which is so often. But we're not in a space where we're going to say that everything is going to rest in the cloud, because I think there's a lot of nervousness around how the whole cloud for at least financial services is going to emerge in the years to come. So
that's an interesting position that we see all the time. And the technologists will throw a controversial argument towards that, right? They will tell you, well, number one, on the concept of localization, does it really matter where the information is, knowing that, as I said, 75% of the hack are not coming directly from outside in, they're coming from the hackers finding a credential, sending you an email, and finding a way through your employees to access, and your employees have access to those cloud, or wherever the data is, doesn't matter, in a way. And Swift Bangladesh was exactly like this. The Swift is on the cloud, is not on your system, even though. And the second aspect that technologies would throw out there, I'm sharing that so that you can have both sides of the arguments in mind, is the big clouds, the Microsoft, the Amazon, the Google, right? You know how many people they employ any single minute of the day, 24/7, to secure your data? It's more than 500 people. How many do you employ? And are they 24/7? So there's this argument that technologies will throw out there, which makes for an interesting conversation. So the discussion is often between the feeling, the trust, which is super important. In fact, it's what makes the reality, versus what the data tells you. So keep that in mind as you're exploring your journey toward that. We had a third reaction that was interesting, Hendrix. Do you believe that what you issued 3 weeks ago, you said a policy, kind of goes in that direction?
Thank you. I think when it comes to security, if you have done a proper assessment, if you have added value of what you need to protect, I think there should be no compromise over what solution you select. I mean, if there's very high value in your information, I think you go for the very, very best solution. I mean, just taking the point from the gentleman, the third question, I think when it comes to security, you cannot develop your strategy in isolation, because what has happened to Bangladesh, it might happen to Seychelles just a matter of time. So we need to have some global solutions, global practices, so that they ensure that you are well safe against those attacks.
So I wish we had more time to cover a bit more, but it's lunchtime and we're 10 minutes late. So I'd like to thank the panel for these interesting conversations, and we can have more discussion over lunch if you want. Thank you very much.